Greetings everyone, my name is Michael McCann and this tutorial is about creating a burning paper effect in Blender. To start, I'm going to delete my default cube and hit Shift-A to add a plane. Now I'm going to go into Top View and tab into Edit Mode and scale a little on the Y-axis. Now I'm going to run a loop cut up the middle and a couple on the side, and that way when we subdivide we'll have nice even squares. I'm also going to change the number of cuts to maybe 15 or a couple more, maybe 17. We're going to be using dynamic paint, and instead of the default selection of vertex, we're going to be using image sequence. So because they're images, we need to properly UV unwrap our image first. We'll have to reapply the texture in cycles, but it's really important to get it right before you start dynamic paint. Now with our plane selected, we're going to go to our Physics tab and click Dynamic Paint and add Canvas and change it from Vertex to Image Sequence, and I'm going to double the resolution to 512 pixels. And here under Dynamic Paint Output, I'm going to select the UV map that I just unwrapped. And the file destination output, I'm going to direct, instead of the default temp folder, I've created 3 folders on my desktop, one called Alpha, Burn, and Emission. I'm going to select the Alpha folder, and our canvas settings are done, so we're going to add an icosphere, and this will be our brush. I'm going to scale it down. And now I'm just going to move it to the top right-hand corner. This will be where the fire begins. Now under the Physics tab, I'm going to click Dynamic Paint again, and this time I'm going to choose Brush and Add Brush. And our settings here are fine, as they are. Now I'm going to hit I to insert a location, and then move up every 50 frames or so. And I watched a few reference images of paper burning, and it appeared to like come down the side. It never really seemed to move right towards the center of the page. It would follow along the side or the top and then kind of move its way into the middle slowly. So that's kind of what I'm doing with the brush. I'm just sort of moving it down along the side, and then probably when it gets halfway, I'm just going to start moving it toward the middle. And now I'll move it sort of up. And then go to the end, move it up further, maybe off to the side. Okay, and I'll just hit Alt-A and watch the animation. And it's difficult to tell without seeing the effects of the dynamic paint, but I think that looks okay. And so I'm satisfied with that, so I'm going to bake the image sequence. And remember, all those images are going to go to that folder on my desktop. So now the only setting I have to change now for my canvas is I need to redirect the next set of image sequences to the next folder, which is Burn. And now my canvas settings are done, but I do need to make some adjustments to my brush now. I'm going to change the color to black. And instead of mesh volume, I'm going to use proximity. And I'm also going to take the paint distance down to 0.8. And I think that's good. So I'm going to bake this image sequence. And now once again we need to go and change the file output to, I'm going to choose my third folder on the desktop, which was emission. And change the brush settings again. I'm going to go back to mesh volume, which it was originally. And I'm going to change the color, although the color doesn't actually matter. So currently, our icosphere will be painting over top of the part of the texture that will be completely transparent, the alpha image, or the first dynamic paint that we made. So we need to scale our brush, or icosphere, just slightly. Too much will actually ruin the effect. But you'll understand why once we add the materials and cycles. So now finally I'm going to bake that image sequence. And we'll be ready to add our materials. I'm going to add a new material. And I'm going to reapply that texture from before. I get a little claustrophobic in the node editor. Okay, so now I'm going to hit Shift A and add a transparent shader and mix the two. And now I'm going to add an image texture. Now I'm going to go to my desktop and find that first folder, alpha, and select the first image and click Open Image, and then change single image to image sequence. It's important to check auto refresh, and I'm going to change the frames to 250. And now I'm going to use the alpha from this texture as the factor in the mix shader. So that's the first part done. Now we're going to add that dark border around the alpha to give it that, charred or ashy look. I'm going to just select this texture and Shift D to duplicate it. I'm going to go back into my desktop and select my second folder, burn, and select the first image. I'm going to set this up the same way, just, image sequence, make sure auto refresh is checked, 250 frames. Now I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to add a mix RGB node. And I'm going to mix these two textures together. And then use the alpha, if I can grab it, the alpha as the factor. And there you go. And if you're not really familiar with dynamic paint, this is why I chose proximity for this brush, because it kind of bleeds outward from, it extends a little further out than the actual brush. So it creates that cool, burning effect. I'm going to of straightened up my nodes a bit. Actually, I haven't been working in cycles for very long. Like many people, I was kind of scared of cycles for the longest time. And, whereas I'm sure a lot of people can look at, huge webs or node trees and feel, like it just makes sense to them, I get really lost in them. So I've started using frames, actually, because somehow, putting, little groups of nodes into pretty colorful squares just makes it make sense to me. Okay, so now that we have the first parts done, we need to add the emission. So Shift A, add emission shader. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it. I'm going to make one red and the other like maybe like a yellowish orange. Okay, now I'm going to mix the two emission shaders together. And I'm going to mix our diffuse shader with that mix shader. So now we need to add a texture. I'm going to find the third folder on my desktop, which was emission. Select the first image. And set it up the same way. Check auto refresh and set it to 250 frames. And now we're going to use the color of this texture as the factor of the mix shader. And there's our emission, our edge, and that's why we scaled up the icosphere so that it would extend a little farther beyond that alpha. But currently there's two problems. One, our emissions are blended together to make one color. And also we would need to break it up with some of that black, charred paper. It wouldn't be one continuous line. So I'm going to add a Voronoi texture, and that's going to be the factor of the two emission shaders. You can see it sort of separates the color. I'm going to scale it to about 11. So now I'm going to hit Shift A and add a diffuse shader. And I want to make the color completely black. And I'm going to mix it with this mix shader. And now the factor of this, you could use a procedural texture. I'm actually going to add a texture. And I'm just going to use a grunge map that I downloaded from CG Textures. Now I'm going to add a color ramp and slide the white value back a little. I'm also going to adjust my scaling a bit. Different grunge textures will have different effects. This is actually, the only one I've tried, but it's sort of my go-to for grunge textures. Something that you can do to make the animation a little more realistic is to insert keyframes into the values on your emission shaders, and then slide the timeline along and just change the values by strengthening it or lowering the value of the strength. So we'll slide it up a little and then increase the emission. Hit I to insert your keyframe. Move it up a little and then slide the value back down. These little changes actually have a huge impact on the final animation. Something else that we can do is add some keyframes into the scale on our Veroni texture, and this will sort of move those colors of red and yellow around a little. And lastly, I'm going to put keyframes into the rotation of that grunge texture. This will just help move the emission and the that black diffuse around. The more variation in that emission that you can create, the more realistic it'll look in the end. So now we're getting pretty close to the end. We're going to delete this brush and we're going to add a new brush. So we need to hit Shift A and add mesh. And this time I'm going to use a torus. I'll get to Y in a moment, but we're going to scale it down really small. And I'm going to move it up to the corner where the original brush was. And this is going to be how we add the fire to our burning piece of paper. So I'm going to go to my Physics tab, click Dynamic Paint, and add this as a new brush. And I'm going to use the Object Center. This is the reason for using the torus, because it's very important to see exactly where you're painting with this brush. So basically the object here is just to keep the center of the torus along the edge where that emission is. So right between the orange and the black. I've tried other methods. This is just the one that works best. It's a little tedious, but it kind of gave me the best result. So, you just, slide the timeline along, and, as the image progresses, you just, animate the torus moving down again along that line. Okay, so I'm just going to hit Alt-A and just double check it to make sure that it's following at least mostly along that edge, and it seems to be doing okay. It veers off a little, but I don't think that it'll matter too much. I think that looks fine. Now in our dynamic paint settings for our canvas, we're going to change it from image sequence back to vertex. And we're going to change it from paint to weight. Now I'm going to select my brush and I'm going to take the paint distance down a lot. I'm going to make it 0.1. And now I'll hit Alt-A and see how that looks. It looks okay, but there's a few things that we need to do to make it better. I'm going to select the canvas. And there are these two selections here, fade and anti-aliasing, and we need to check them both. I'm going to lower the fade time to about 200. Now I'm going to bake. And it's important that you hit this little plus button next to DP weight. That adds the vertex group that we'll be using later when we set up our fire. So I'll just take a quick look at our weight paint. And it looks a little better now. I mean, it's dissolving behind, but not, too fast. The fire itself is moving a little fast for me, but for the tutorial, it's okay. Next, we're going to try to simulate how paper bends and folds as it burns. So we're going to go to our object data and add a shape key, and hit plus, and it adds the basis. So you need to hit plus again to add your first shape key. And with that shape key selected, I'm going to hit tab to go into edit mode. And remember, I'm in right orthographic view. And with my cursor on the bottom right hand side, I'm going to hit Shift W. And that's going to bend the mesh. The bend tool is kind of crazy. If you've never used it, it really matters where your cursor starts. And you don't have to move the cursor too much. So now if I tab back into object mode and slide the value bar up, you see I have a shape key. And I can bend my paper. I'm going to do the same thing from the front orthographic view. So I need to add a second shape key. So with key 2 highlighted, I'm going to go back into edit mode and hit Shift W. Remember, my cursor's on the bottom right hand side. And I'm just going to bend it up a little. And that will be our second shape key. Now I'm going to make sure that my first shape key is selected, and I'm going to hit I to insert a keyframe. And then I'm going to take it up to about frame 120. That's when most of the top right portion of the paper is burned. And I'm going to slide the value bar all the way up, and then insert another keyframe. Now I'm going to slide it back a few frames and select our second shape key and insert a keyframe. And then I'll take it all the way up to maybe 200, just before the end. And slide the value bar all the way up. And insert another keyframe. So now as it starts to burn, it curls, and when it gets halfway down, the side starts to come up. And it looks okay. Not crazy about that side, but it'll do. Now we're going to select our object and hit the space bar and search for quick smoke. Then we're going to select our emitter. And in the physics tab, we're going to change it from smoke to just fire. Next, under Smoke Flow Advanced, we need to select DP Weight under Vertex Group. If you don't see an option there, it's because you didn't add it up here in your settings. So now I'm going to hit Alt-A, and the fire is in the right spot, but it's running really slow because I need to make some changes to the domain. I'm going to check Smoke Adaptive Domain and Smoke High Resolution. And I want the smoke to dissolve, and I'm going to take the time up a little, maybe 7. There won't be a lot of smoke. And I'm not going to add any divisions. I'm going to keep the flame relatively simple. It's just a small flame on a piece of paper. It's like a candle flame. It wouldn't really be like a roaring kind of a noisy flame. It would be, you know, in all the reference videos I saw, it was always very dull and sort of rounded. So, and even that I think looks a little turbulent. But I think in the final render it'll look okay. I'm going to delete this setup that Blender comes with now. And I'm going to add my own that I actually I got from Blender HD, Jonathan Lampell's tutorial on fire shaders and cycles. Also, Andrew Price has a really good one. It's, I think, more current, but both of them are really great tutorials. So if you want to make your own fire shader, I would definitely check out those tutorials. The only thing I'm going to do in it is, in those reference photos, there was always a little bit of blue at the base of the flame. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of blue. So now I'm going to bake the fire simulation. And save, of course, always save. And that's it, really. I mean, that's the whole thing. There's a lot of really cool things that you could do with this technique. Anything from like burning cloth to even like a building dissolving in like a like a nuclear explosion. Just lots of really cool ideas. So anyway, I hope somebody watches this and learns something and likes it. And if you do like it, please like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next tutorial.